It's bad enough having to fill in for Skip, but then I have to follow Candy. It's beyond intimidating, trust me. When Skip asked me to fill in for him, I asked him, what do you want me to speak on? And he said, well, Palm Sunday. Let's give him an early Palm Sunday, primarily because the cantata is next Sunday. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday. And there would not be an opportunity for a dedicated message. So here goes. Next Sunday is the only day of the Christian calendar where you come to church and we give you foliage. The palm fronds, of course, mean that it's Palm Sunday. And that means we're getting closer to the end of Lent. And that means that we're about ready to start Holy Week. And then, hopefully, you'll be here to celebrate the holiest day of the Christian year, Easter. But next Sunday, we have the palms to contend with. And what from the outside looks like a rather strange tradition, but really most everything of Palm Sunday is strange. Mark describes it pretty well. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Traditionally, we always have a mistake of some sort in the bulletin. And I didn't want to be upstaged by Skip. So, it's Mark 11, 1 through 11, not 9. And it's on page 717, not 714. It really wouldn't make much sense. It may not make sense anyway. But anyway, Mark says, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there which no one has ever ridden. Untie it, bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you doing this, say the Lord needs it and will send it back very shortly. They went, found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, what are you doing untying that colt? They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Jesus entered Jerusalem, went into the temple courts, looked around at everything. But since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Dan, G.K. Chesterton. He wrote a poem, and I asked Dan if he had any input as to what I should say, and he said, anything by G.K. Chesterton will work. So this is it. He wrote a poem called The Donkey, and some of us had to memorize it as kids. And I hope that maybe it'll begin to help you appreciate a bit of the strangeness of Palm Sunday. When fishes flew, with monstrous head and sickening cry, the tattered outlaw of the earth, fools, for I also had my hour. Now some aspects are quite straightforward. Jesus riding on the donkey into Jerusalem was clear claim to be the Messiah. The prophet Zechariah said this in chapter 9 of his book. Jesus was absolutely clear as to what he was doing. And it seems the crowd was also aware of what was going on as well. They sang, they praised him. At the end of this passage, when Jesus leaves Jerusalem, only the 12 go with him. The crowds have disappeared. If Jesus was truly the Messiah, you would have thought the crowds would have followed him everywhere. Yet there's no sign of him. Now the second strange thing is that there's no opposition from the authorities. You would have thought that with such a clear statement from Jesus that he was fulfilling messianic prophecies, that there would have been some reaction. Yet, when Jesus is brought on trial, this event's not even mentioned as any kind of evidence. It is as if Mark is saying, you think the Messiah is going to throw out the Romans? Not going to happen. You think he's going to go along with popular opinion? Wrong. And the third strange thing is that the sheer anticlimax of the whole story. After a long journey, Jesus finally enters Jerusalem with praise from the crowds ringing in his ear. He enters the temple, looks around, goes home because it's late. There's a part of the film Forrest Gump where Forrest decides he's going to run across America. And he does. Runs all the way across, gets to the coast, looks around, runs back to the other coast, looks around, starts running in the other direction. By this time, I'm going to destroy something yet. By this time, there's a crowd following him, and he slows down. It's in the desert. He just slows down and stops. And he turns around to the group and says, I'm quite tired. I think I'll go home now. That's kind of the same thing. There's a similar sense of anticlimax here. After this epic journey, Jesus turns around, leaves almost straight away. But Mark is saying, this isn't where we stop. There's more to come. Jesus is not finished. Palm Sunday is just the beginning. So what can we learn from these strange things? The disappearing crowd, the lack of reaction from the authorities, and the sheer anticlimax of the story. Well, first, I would say being in the crowd does not mean that you know what's going on. Easter is always a reminder of how quickly we can change our minds. From celebration to crucifixion only took a few days. So let's be wary of trusting the crowd. Second, remember that in the middle of everything, Jesus was the only one who knew what he was doing. It's still the case. But also be encouraged that we are not expected to know it all. Jesus told the disciples many times he was going to die. Yet none of them got it. Yet he still took them with him and kept explaining. So if you're not sure exactly what happened at Easter or who Jesus is, keep following and asking. So anyway, all these centuries later, we Christians gather in churches and collect these palms and we wave them around. We celebrate a great parade that took place a long time ago. The coming of the Messiah to Jerusalem. And we are so close to Easter. We almost want to take this day as a warm-up, a celebration for the big celebration. And if you read the story today, knowing nothing about what happens between Sundays, you could. But you all know that something happens between Sundays. The story isn't as straightforward as it seems, but stories about Jesus seldom are. When I was in college, I saw a production of Jesus Christ Superstar. It's a musical that traces the events of Holy Week. I was struck by the crowd, the chorus of singers that followed Jesus. As they waved palms on Sunday, they shouted his praises and sung and called out to him. But as the week went on, they changed. And by Friday, the same people once shouting their admiration were calling for his death. It's always stuck with me, that change in feeling. I think of it every year during Holy Week. Jesus goes from the exalted one to the one who is offered up as a sacrifice by the crowd. There's something fitting about the fact that in many churches the palms are saved and used the following year. They burn the palms and use the ashes. And the ashes we wear, as a symbol of our humanness and frailty and mistakes, because sometimes we turn from Christ and we get it wrong. We don't like to dwell on that. We don't like to dwell on the reality that Christ was betrayed and denied and abandoned. We like to stick with the Palm Sunday and the Easter joy, not Monday, Thursday, and Palm Sunday, and the Good Friday pain. Holy Week, fittingly, is the holiest week in the church year. It's also the busiest, and many pastors, whether they admit it or not, know that when they announce the extra services that week, there's sort of a heavy sigh. They get it. We're all busy. Sunday morning feels hard enough for all of us good Christians. Thursday night after a long day at work is even tougher. You just want to go home, have dinner, either tackle the pile of laundry or have a few precious hours to yourself. You probably don't want to take that car out one more time, drive to church, and sit through another service, and one that's not so joyful at that. No one will blame you if you don't. No pastor I know takes attendance. And the truth be told, the clergy all have their own Netflix queues and stacks of unfinished novels. And they probably look at them longingly on their way out their door. But the occupational hazard of being clergy means that they can't call out on Holy Week, which means the messages of the stories we hear on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday can't go unheard by us. That's good, because what we hear about Jesus on those two nights is the same as what we hear every day in our lives. But we don't talk about that much because most churches are good at doing Sundays, but sometimes not so good at acknowledging what comes between the Sundays. On Sunday morning, we often focus on the joy, the uplifting hymns like we just heard. We hear hopeful sermons. We smile, we shake hands, we dress up. Ta-da. We talk about grace and blessings and gratitude. It's not a bad thing. But when many of us parishioners leave on Sunday, we step into a different world. Between Sundays, Pastor Skip sometimes has the opportunity to visit with people who are facing a struggle that few of us understand. They're sick or injured, dying or bereaved or depressed, heartbroken, betrayed, alone, and wrestling with doubt. And if you come to church on Palm Sunday and Easter, you might not think that Pastor Skip knows much about that. But if you come between Sundays, you'll find a faith that knows what that is like. And you'll find a God who knows what that's like. To me, the most comforting part of Holy Week is not waving a triumphal palm, or the next Sunday morning, or the flowers and the joyous hymns on the next. It's what happens in between. It's Jesus on Monday, Thursday, sharing a table with the people he loved the most. It's him washing their feet and showing that the mark of a true leader is whether they can serve others. And it's Jesus still loving those disciples, even though he knew that at best they would abandon him, at worst they would betray him. And it's Jesus in the garden, alone, heartbroken and struggling between what he wanted to do and what he knew he had to do. And on Good Friday it continues. The world turns against him, and the ones who cheered his entry in Jerusalem instead cheer his death. He suffers. He calls out to a God who does not seem to answer. He doubts. He feels pain and loss and grief. And in the end, he loses the life he knew. I realize that all members of the clergy are asked by those who are going through a difficult time whether God is angry when they have doubts, or when they wonder why God doesn't seem to be answering prayers. They ask if God understands when they suffer and when they feel alone. When they do, it's not the Christ of Palm Sunday or Easter who is pointed to first, but the Christ of Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday. The one who lived as one of us, who loved as one of us, who doubted as one of us, who suffered as one of us, and of course who died as one of us. And only then do we point to the Christ who rose again and overcame the worst the world could throw at him. I sometimes worry that we forget the lessons of Holy Week during the rest of the year. Some churches even cancel midweek services due to low attendance, and instead roll all the stories into a Passion Sunday service on Palm Sunday. But when we forget Holy Week, I wonder if we're losing that time we once had to sit with Christ in his own human struggles. And I wonder if when we lose that time, we lose our ability to learn to sit with others in their struggle, and of course with ourselves in our own. But what would Christian life look like if we took that time? Huh? What if we became known not just as the people who knew what to do on Sunday, but the ones who knew how to stay with you when your life is falling apart, just as Christ asks us to do on Monday, Thursday? Or the ones who could stand by and still love and respect you even when you call out your doubts, as Jesus did on the cross. What would happen if we weren't just known for our Easter Sunday celebrations, but for our Thursday night solidarity, our Friday afternoon compassion? We have the capability to be those people. We have it because Christ has called us to be those people. All we have to do is be willing to make the journey along with him. Not just on Sundays, but on the days between. The world has plenty of Sunday morning Christians. It needs a few more of the weekday ones. Next Sunday, we'll wave palms. We'll shout Hosanna. We'll look ahead to the resurrection. But when you leave, consider taking one of them with you. And then when times get hard and the week grows tougher, look at them as a reminder of who you could be. Not the person in the crowd who yells out what everyone else is yelling, but the person instead who believed what they said on Sunday and who will follow Christ on this journey, even a journey that continues between Sundays. Christ is waiting for us there. May we join him on this holy path. And this is the good news for today. Praise be to God.
Amen.